Hello, welcome to our webinar, Energy Efficiency and Faithful Action. I'm your host, Carla Stoltzfus Detweiler. I'm the Climate Justice Coordinator for Mennonite Church USA. This webinar is the final in our four-part series on climate justice, seeking shalom, part of our Learn, Pray, Join initiative. Many people, many communities and congregations wonder, what practical steps can we take toward climate justice? And the good news is that energy efficiency improvements and shifting toward renewable energy sources like solar power in our homes, in our churches, in our community facilities, these can make a significant positive impact on our climate, while also helping our budgets and boosting our morale. So here today to share their journeys toward energy efficiency and toward net zero are three panelists who bring just a wealth of knowledge and experience. I am so grateful for these three who are joining us here today. They have been leaders in their congregations and communities in working toward climate justice. So I'll introduce these panelists. We welcome Amy Huser. Amy is the Sustainability and Outdoor Education Coordinator for Camp Friedenswald in Cassopolis, Michigan. Amy has led the camp in creating and implementing a strategic resilience and sustainability plan. And that plan is vast and includes steps like installing solar panels and electric car charging stations, monitoring food waste and composting, and much more. And Amy helps to joyfully weave values of sustainability and climate justice into the camp experience for all visitors to Friedenswald. Thank you so much for joining us, Amy. Welcome. Eric Souter joins us from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Eric serves as founder and president of Regional, which is a nonprofit organization that catalyzes local climate solutions in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Eric is an engineer and a social innovator who has worked alongside farmers as well as natural resource professionals to create more resilient agricultural economies. And now he is enjoying supporting climate action at the intersection of urban and rural communities. Thank you, Eric, for joining us. Welcome. And we have Nelson Kilmer with us. Nelson joins us from Heston, Kansas. He is a retired professor of physics and mathematics at Heston College. He, I think, brings the most experience of any of us. He began experimenting with solar water heating and air heating systems in the 1980s. He heated his home with solar heating panels for 30 years, long before it became popular. Nelson has served as a consultant to numerous households and organizations in designing and installing solar systems. Most recently, he was a key leader in his congregation, Heston Mennonite Church, as they planned, raised funds, and installed a solar system that has dramatically reduced the congregation's carbon emissions and provides 96% of the congregation's electric energy needs. Thank you for joining us, Nelson. Welcome. We're also joined by Lorraine Stutzman-Amstutz. She is Mennonite Church USA's denominational minister for peace and justice. Thanks for joining us, Lorraine. And thank you to all of you who are on the call today, joining us as participants. I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. You can put your name and tell us where you're joining us from today. So today's webinar is in webinar format, so all attendees are muted, but the chat is enabled. We will also be posting links in the chat and have already begun that. You can feel free to follow those to get more information about our topic today. Spanish interpretation is available, and you can get that by pushing the globe button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you can't locate or see the globe button, there might be a more icon with 3 dots. And if you click that, you should see the globe interpretation button. We welcome your questions today, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Only panelists will be able to see your questions. We also received a few pre-submitted questions, and we will also try to get to those at the end as time allows. Lorraine, would you lead us in an opening prayer?
Sure. Let's pray together. God, we come before you today with hearts full of gratitude for the abundant blessings of this earth. And we acknowledge the profound responsibility we bear as stewards of your creation. And we ask for your guidance and for your wisdom on our journey to ensure that we care for the planet in ways that care for all of its inhabitants, as well as the land itself. We ask that you grant us clarity to understand the impact of our actions and the courage to make necessary changes. Teach us to cherish and preserve the gifts of sun, wind, and water that you have provided. And may we always remember our interconnectedness with all of life and with future generations. And let our efforts reflect your love and care for the world so that we may be led to a healthier, more sustainable future. Amen.
Thank you, Lorraine. Let's dive in with some questions for our panelists. Let's start off with defining some terms that may or may not be familiar to our participants today. We sometimes talk about net zero energy, or carbon neutral. I wonder if our panelists could help us understand what these terms mean. And then why are these terms and moving toward carbon neutrality or net zero, why are they important for our climate? Amy, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I can do that. So both of these terms are describing reaching a point where the amount of carbon emissions, oh my goodness, or greenhouse emissions. My phone is ringing. That never happens. And I don't know how to make it stop. Okay. Is equal to the amount of carbon or greenhouse gases being sequestered or taken out of the atmosphere. And the main difference is that carbon neutral would be referring to carbon emissions, and net zero is all greenhouse gases, which would include other gases like methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. And I guess I could add that globally, science says that we need to be at net zero by 2050 for all our greenhouse gas emissions in order to have a decent chance at staying under that 1.5 degrees of warming.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, thanks for helping us see what the difference is there and why it's important. Eric, would you like to add more?
Sure. I would just like to add that I find both the process of working to understand your emissions and then trying to do something about them to be an empowering one, but also want to recognize that the idea of a carbon footprint or these other things have really come from the fossil fuel industry as a way to make individuals feel responsible for these things. So there is both the system level challenge and the importance that we don't like shoulder all of the weight of that on our individual choices and the things that we do. But also the opportunity in working to learn more about that is a chance to really find agency and feel like you are really doing things and getting involved in your home, in your congregation and community in making real progress on climate.
Thanks, Eric. Nelson, did you want to add anything here?
Well, I think all of us have been seeing what's happening on the earth in the last few weeks here, and the number of tornadoes and so forth, and the impact of climate change on many people's lives. A tremendous amount of damage, 36% more tornadoes this year in the past. All of these are indications that we've got a serious problem on our hands, and I think the importance of responding to this is that there is something we can do about it if we start to address the emissions issues and look at ways to reduce our participation in it and reduce the social cost of carbon to everybody on the earth. It's not just the United States, it's all around the globe that has a problem with this.
Yes, thank you all for helping us understand those terms and their importance, and also for helping us think about the distinction too between individual responsibility and systemic change. And today we're talking about things that we can do on the personal and community levels that, yeah, to help us have that sense of agency and power that we really can make a difference at those levels too. So we're here as people connected to Mennonite Church USA, people of faith. What does energy efficiency have to do with faith? Who would like to jump in here? Since Amy started us last time, I'll say, Eric, would you like to start us?
Sure, happy to. I think one thing that I'd like to highlight in this is that I think we have a real opportunity as the broader Mennonite Church to really demonstrate how our faith connects to these ideas of stewardship and of care for the earth and each other. And as I look at the chat, a lot of people are coming to this conversation from communities where there are more Mennonites than average across the whole US. And I think we have a unique opportunity to really live that out in our communities and show leadership for what it looks like in a community to respond in ways that are aligned with our faith. I'd bring an example forward that's maybe similar with other communities as well, of how Lancaster, for instance, has one of the highest per capita numbers of resettled refugees, because the large percentage of Anabaptist communities here responds to issues of immigration and welcome of a stranger in different ways than many other places with similar demographics. And I think we have a really similar opportunity with care of creation. And I think it's an exciting call for us as a church.
Thank you, Eric. Nelson, would you like to help us connect the dots between faith and energy efficiency?
Well, I think energy efficiency has something to do with creation care. Ultimately, a lot of that efficiency and the reduction of damage to the environment. And part of us as a people, I feel, should not distribute the disappearance of CO2 in the atmosphere and think it doesn't do anything to anybody. And actually, it is a major thing. And so we have a creation here that's being altered and modified with the actions of the people on the earth. And so this is really becoming a pretty major issue, I think, for us. And I think as a faith, we should address and respond to a situation that is causing a lot of hurt and harm in the world. That's part of our faith, I think, should be part of our faith and justice stance, is the way I would see it.
Thank you, Nelson. Amy, what would you add? Help us make this connection.
Yeah, I don't need to add much. I think for me, my faith is very much about peace and justice and love, and energy efficiency is an indispensable. The International Energy Agency says it's an indispensable tool to achieve our global climate targets. So climate change is a peace and justice issue for me. It is for everyone. And energy efficiency is key. And as I guess as Americans, we know we kind of use more of it than the average global citizen as well. So anything we can do to bring us back down to a more reasonable level of usage is also connected to my faith. Yeah.
And Amy, I remember being at Friedenswald and you pulled out some balloons that looked like the earth. And I just wonder if you could explain what you were doing when you did that.
Yeah, sure. It's a teaching tool that the Global Footprint Network uses to think about just resource use and consumption in general. And so if everyone on the globe lived like the average American citizen, we would be using 5 Earths. That's the consumption rate. And then I usually take 3 of those away. We pop, bounce those balloons out into the campers, and then take 2 of them back, or 3 of them back, and say we have, as a globe, we're using close to 2 Earths through our consumption. And I mean, how many do we have, right? So we're taking from the future, and really we're seeing now in present day effects of overuse and overconsumption.
Thank you all. Yeah, you helped to make it clear that as people of faith, we respond to the needs and suffering of the world. And so this is part of how we express our faith, our commitment to following Jesus. So in conversations about solar energy and electrification, there have been some questions that I've heard echoed about what do we do about concerns around mining, the pollution, water use, injustices, especially against indigenous peoples and lands, in order to get the minerals needed for a big energy transition. And so I'm wondering if any of you would be willing to speak about how do we hold these concerns together, the concerns of injustices around mining and the urgency to draw down greenhouse gases, the urgency to make this energy transition. Yeah, I guess I'll see who would like to jump in here. I
Well,
know Amy's
I
got some
do.
thought. Okay, Nelson, you want to start us? Go ahead.
Well, I did a little bit of research on that, and I have a paper on 15 or 20 pages long that I studied. But it's a pretty complex issue. It's not one that can easily answer real quickly, because the problems are somewhat in the mining processes and how that happens, and also in the related to the types of materials and where it's located, where the mining happens, and what kind of societies and what kind of safeguards they have in regards to the damage to the people and the justice to the people. So those are just a few thoughts. And sometimes people question, like, does a solar panel actually take more energy to create it than it'll ever produce in its lifetime? Well, I did some research on that, and I found out that to make a panel takes only 3 or 4% of the energy it produces in its lifetime. So if you have that kind of a ratio, you lose some by the production and manufacture of the item you use. But I think that's probably a lot higher than some other types of sources of energy, like nuclear plants, who require such amount of energy. So solar panels, to me, are one of the most practical and efficient and most simple. And then the decommissioning process, when you take them offline, you have to do something like with even the blades on solar wind energy and solar panels. And the decommissioning for solar is the lowest of all the energy sources we have. So I tend to look towards solar myself because of some of those issues that connect to the concerns about pollution, decommissioning, and recycling. And definitely recycling is also important, also with the minerals process. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Nelson, for helping us put in perspective, the energy needed for production versus the energy that a solar panel can produce, and then the decommissioning concerns. Amy, what are your thoughts on this?
This is a really big question, and I do not feel like an expert on this at all. I just know that all this work we're doing, this transformation that our society needs to take, is complicated. And it's complicated big picture, and even in little decisions that we make at camp, it's complicated. And there's very few pure answers. And in my experience, if you need to have a perfect solution that can impede progress, and it would be ideal if we could wait until everything was done in just the right way in order to make change, but it is urgent to be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions now and also work on doing it better at the same time. It kind of all just needs to be happening now at the same time. And so I would just say we do our research. It's important to be aware of practices. It's important to know, what is happening with the mining, and reduce it as much as possible, any harm for the society and the environment. But the need for a perfect solution, don't let that stop you from taking steps forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Amy. Eric, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in to just say that I believe we're in a really important time of implementation where we have to do a lot of this work, and it involves a lot of building and real things happening on the ground. The overall trends for utility scale solar and other renewables are really at a point where it is the cheapest form of energy. And that gives me less of a concern that at some point in the not too distant future, we'll be dealing with a clean grid. But then our challenge is, have we decarbonized our homes and businesses and congregations and all these tiny things to be able to take advantage of that? I've been in a situation that I think intersects in an interesting way with this question here recently, where some local land conservation groups have asked me to come forward as regional and oppose a pumped hydro facility on the Susquehanna River. So it would be used to store energy and is really designed to level the demand on the grid through the day. And it is in that way an important climate solution. And if you weren't doing it with pumped hydro, you'd be looking to add batteries or other types of technologies. And it's been a challenging decision for me because I see it as a not in my backyard kind of reaction that I recognize the ecological harm that this facility is causing, while also seeing the need for facilities like that and these sorts of things. So I think we have to approach these questions with the complexity of, do those of us who have more power just get to be in a position where we can push all of the negative impacts of these things to other people? Or can we also recognize the complexity that some of the things that we need to build will be built near us? And what does that look like? So just an anecdote of things that I've been weighing and thinking through. But if we're not seeing some of these things happen close to us, we're not, that power, I think, is separating us from where the impact is actually happening.
Thank you for helping us grapple with that complexity. And I would also just want to point out, I'm grateful for the work of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, which is a group that Mennonite congregations can partner with in standing in solidarity with Indigenous peoples who are affected by mining. And also Mennonite Church USA has been a supporter of Apache Stronghold and the movement to protect Oak Flat. And if you follow Piecemeal, you'll see updates about that. So we can be in solidarity with some of those communities whose lands are endangered, even as we transition toward renewable energy. So yeah, moving on, we really want to hear the stories of how you have accompanied your communities in each of your settings toward energy efficiency, toward net zero. So can you share with us from your experience? And if somebody is just starting out, how do you know how to take the first step to make a plan toward net zero or just more energy efficiency? And yeah, we'll look at household level, congregational level, and the camp organizational level. Eric, would you start us off?
Sure. So I think from the household level, a really great place to start is to look at a carbon footprint calculator. And I mentioned that a bit before. I really see it as an empowering way to understand both from energy, but also food and transportation, even your investments and other things that you purchase. Where are emissions coming from, and how does that divide across these different parts of your life? So you really get a new level of insight onto what decisions really make a big difference. So we at Regional built one of those calculators on our website, and that also links to a local carbon offset marketplace where you can purchase offsets that are here in Lancaster. But then there are many similar types of calculators out there. if you're really interested in energy itself, I think scheduling a home energy audit with a building performance professional is an excellent place to start. This will help to identify opportunities and priorities for improving home systems and then creating a plan. It helps you know when things might fail or need to be retired in your home, so you know what to do when that happens or to replace it before they fail, and really gives you that pathway. An audit like that might cost $400 to $700 depending on where you are, but I think it's a great way to assess your options. I'd also add into this that if any of you are connected to businesses, all of this stuff is parallel there. That there are really incredible opportunities, especially through the Inflation Reduction Act right now, for both households and businesses to significantly contribute either tax incentives or direct rebates to things that you're implementing in your home or business. From a residential side, there's an incredible resource called Rewiring America that we can put in the chat that really allows you to enter your household income and your zip code and identify all of the different incentives that are available to you and when they might be rolling out if they're not available right now. So yeah, that's Rewiring America, really incredible resource in there. Thanks.
Thank you for identifying some of those first steps, Eric, and some places to go for more information. Nelson, would you share with us from your experience at Hesston Mennonite? What can it look like as a congregation moving towards renewable energy?
Well, I'd be glad to share with you, and it's been a journey. It's been about 1.5 years since we started, and the kind of steps that we followed. We first our board, our church leadership group gets together every fall, and 1.5 years ago, in the fall of 2022, they came back with some goals for each of the major areas in the church, and one was kind of an interesting one, that they wanted us to explore options for reducing our carbon footprint as a congregation, which gave some emotion forward to working on that area. Some other areas were that we have some financial issues because of budget and mortgage payments that we were needing to take care of. And we also faced some facilities issues, air conditioning systems and so forth. And so we had a number of things to deal with. But the way we moved forward first was to form a planning committee in our church. These were approved by the governing board of the church, and we had one that did planning for solar energy, and there really weren't a lot of people on it. There were 4 of us. Our treasurer in the church, and I always would encourage anybody that does this to get your financial people involved early on if you're going to plan to spend a fairly substantial amount of money and involves the congregation in a broad way. So that was part of it. And so we developed a planning committee, and in the planning committee, we had our church treasurer chair that committee. I was asked to be on it. Jim Yoder, who was a professor of chemistry, and part of his Gmail address is Jim Yoder Carbon. So he's very interested in carbon reduction. Has taught it in his classes at the college a lot. And then Jerry Selzer as part of our outreach group, and he had solar in his home and was a member of now our outreach committee there. So the 4 of us actually started working in the fall of 2022. It took us about 2 months to really put together a plan that we could feel comfortable with presenting to the church. There's a lot of complexity in terms of what size do you use, how many panels, how do you put it on the roof, how do you put it all together. It takes a bit of planning, and you also want to have some accurate numbers. And I was the one that had the major spreadsheet that ground out all the numbers to talk about the economics and the carbon reduction and the dollars saved on the budget. And most of the churches and most of the organizations, I've worked with about 6 or 7. I worked with the Arboretum. I worked with the retirement community in Newton. I worked with the city, North Newton City offices. I've worked with Bethel College Mennonite Church and Kidron Bethel Retirement Community. Maybe I said that already, in Newton. And I helped them, each one, work on especially their carbon footprint. And that's something to work on to assess that all. So anyhow, most of the time in doing this, you try to develop a group of people that have interest and some focus because of the mission of the organization to help get started. And I saw a question that was coming up. What are the first steps you take? Well, one is you have to learn what the situation is. You learn about your kilowatt hour use, your bills and all that for a year at least, to put that into the information and so forth. But then we had these planning committees, and what we ended up doing then was to develop a solar plan for the church, which would address our carbon footprint. And we decided to go for the best we could, and our roof and our situations was capable of handling up to 321 panels, which was about 127 kilowatts or DC on the roof. And it puts out about 100,000 watts when the sun shines here. So that's a fairly significant system. And we also touched base with contractors to start with too, to get an estimate of what it was going to cost us and that information. After about 2 months of working on that, what we did next was to call a congregational meeting during the morning Sunday school hour and had as many people as we could. We had a nice group there, and the group, we presented the thinking and the work we had done to that point and showed them how it would look possibly, and how I'll just hold up a picture here of our roof and you can see what it does look like. We have a roof and you probably can't see it, but some of the panels are on the flat part of the roof and some of them are on the south facing roof and some of them are on another roof over there. So anyhow, we figured out where to put it all and how to put it together. And then we met with the congregation and talked about this and shared the plan with them and discussed what would tentative costs might look like. It was a good process because I think one of the things when you engage with a congregation, you really have to be aware of. It's not like an individual where you can decide to do what you want to tomorrow and you have the funds do it. With a congregation, you have to really engage the congregation in dialogue and participation and thinking through, is everybody with it or do they like it or they don't like it? And so we held that question and answer session. Well, some people felt we have a problem with our budget. We have a problem with our air conditioning systems. Some of them aren't working anymore and things like that. And so that raised some questions. And finally, instead of just doing solar on our church, now this is different than all the other projects I worked on. All the rest of them were just solar. We decided we needed to incorporate not just solar, but incorporate paying off our mortgage and incorporate fixing our air conditioning systems all at once. And so that led us to a much bigger plan than we had originally thought, to actually go and do a fundraising campaign and put together a brochure that talked about our past, the history of our church and how we had built the church. Talked about pastors and their engagement, the system, how much we would save in 30 years, and made some graphs of that. Our bill would probably be about 1.8 million in 30 years, and we could save about 70% of that cost with the solar system. So it was both a combination of economic and savings as well there. And the good news is that once we did that, we put out the brochure and had a little, on the backside, a little pledge form there that just said how you can contribute in over 3 years. What could you contribute to help this happen? And we were absolutely amazed at how much the congregation responded to that. They contributed heavily. And some of them said they don't want to support solar, but some of them said, I'd really like to help pay off the mortgage. And some of them said, I really want to support getting the air conditioning fixed. So we gave them 3 options. You can do whatever you want to. And we raised enough money through that process to do the solar system at 70% of it, because we got 30% from the federal government for the Inflation Reduction Act. And we raised enough to pay off the mortgage. And actually, we did all that in 4 months. And this is what happened. And I don't know if you can read that or not, but we ended up having a celebration 4 months later and a paid in full breakfast at the church. And we celebrated, gave everybody a little plaque, and everybody really enjoyed that. During that process, another thing you really need to think, this is my suggestion, when people are starting to say, I will contribute $10,000, $5,000, $200, $300, $400, we sent thank you notes to every one people that made a pledge. It confirmed the pledge. It said, thanks for your interest and your participation and your support of the project there. So that congregational communications is good. And then we did take it to our annual business meeting, and the annual business meeting, it was a bit of a struggle because we were struggling with our budget, and we were struggling with how do we get the money to pay for this? And we couldn't raise money because we didn't have approval. It's a catch-22 situation. So we went ahead anyhow, and the church voted to move ahead. Part of what helped them move ahead was to know that there would be enough savings in 12 years. We took the savings on our electric bill that would pay the principal and interest, and also took 30% from the government. We have enough money to pay for it with even without any contributions toward the project. And some said, well, it'll pay for itself. Let's just go ahead and do that, even though we didn't have any money to pay for it at that moment. That's maybe getting long enough on that. Anyhow, the good news is, let me just say one more thing and then I'll conclude. The environmental impact of this, we're saving this year 300,000 pounds or 150 tons of CO2 emissions from our church. Over 30 years, we'll save about 7 million pounds or 3,500 tons. And the social cost of carbon, which is the quote, the damage done to the environment, first year is about $25,000, and over the life of the system will be about $900,000, a little bit under $1 million reduction in environmental damage just because of our church doing solar on it. That's the projections. We don't have a good accurate number and what that will ultimately be, but we very well know what the CO2 savings would be. And also we're saving about $24,000 a year on our electric bill, and we'll save about $1,200,000 over 30 years. So both it came out to be an environmental savings for the church and an economic savings. And in the end, our church, we were able to address all 3 issues by this campaign. And then people picked up on this. I don't know, there's a web group in Washington, D.C. on some Pennsylvania Avenue, environmentamerica.org. If you go there, they wanted to do our story on their webpage. So they put that all up on the webpage. And they've got a really nice webpage about Hesston Mennonite Church and our solar system and how we did it at our church. And then a local paper also wanted to write an article, so a few things like that. But anyhow, there were bumps in the road, this and that along the way. It's not always totally smooth when you're working with 300 people about trying to make decisions about things like this. Not everybody believes in climate change, especially in Kansas. So anyhow,
Thank you, Nelson.
that's probably enough. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you for sharing both the decision-making process, the financial journey, and the impact, environmental impact that journey has had with Hesston Mennonite. And we did put a link to that article from Environment America in the chat,
you
so
did?
people can take a look
Wonderful.
at that.
Wonderful.
And also, just to make a plug, that Hesston Mennonite was also a recipient of the
Yes.
Pam DeYoung Net Zero Energy
Right.
Grant, which at the time was administered by Mennonite Creation Care Network and is now administered by Mennonite Church USA Climate Justice Ministry. So
Appreciate that very much. That
yeah,
we got 2 grants, and one of them was yours, and that group's, and another one too.
and the application window is still open for congregations who would like to apply this year until June 15. So yeah. We'd love to hear from Amy also about what are the kind of the steps that you have taken? How have you mapped out a plan for energy efficiency at Camp Friedenswald?
Yeah, sure. It's so fun to hear people's stories. So thank you, Eric and Nelson. I enjoyed that. um, we started working on our resilience and sustainability plan in 2017 or kind of 2018. So developing the plan, I guess I'm starting at the point where the plan was already there. If you don't have a plan, then there would be some steps yet before that so that you have a path forward. But in terms of energy, I'll just say a few things that kind of we did step by step at that point. We I think both Eric and Nelson said, knowing your benchmark, like getting your assessment of where you're at is important. So we made sure we were getting our 2015 baseline data all collected. We had a big renovation building project that happened in 2016-17 that we felt like kind of made our data kind of haywire those years. So we went back to before that. And once we had that, we started basically changing light bulbs right away. We transitioned to LEDs, which probably most of you have already done. The return on investment for LEDs is really good. We got a rebate from the utility to help pay for that as well. And yeah, it was just kind of a no-brainer at that point. Now I'm thinking about it. There were definitely conversations about it, but it was a clear path in most ways. That definitely gave us a clear reduction in our energy use. We also added a lot of motion sensors at the same time all over camp, and we put a timer on our dining hall lights, which is probably one of our highest light usage areas, so that the lights turn off automatically after an hour and a half. So that was actually a culture shift. People were used to having those lights on all the time, all day, but we went to having them on during meals when people were in there, and when people weren't, they stay off, and it makes a difference. Let's see. Then we began work on the solar project and ended up in 2019 putting 180 panels on the dining hall roof, and also started leasing panels through our utility with a community solar project that they were offering. We have a lot of trees at camp, so there's not a lot of places to put lots of solar panels, but we did what we could. And then we, in that, raising the funding for that was kind of like what Nelson was saying. It was really amazing the way people wanted to give to that project. And we ended up with about $50,000 more that we spent on energy efficiency. And so most of that was spent on adding insulation to a variety of buildings around camp. We also have done some education. We try to every year spend some time with our year-round staff talking about best practices for energy savings behaviors. And we talk about it with our summer staff when they come. And we have set maximum and minimum temperature settings on our air conditioning and heating in our lodges and cabins so that guests can only be 72 degrees warm. That's the warmest they can be in the winter, and the coolest they can be in the summer is 72. And seems very reasonable to me, but we have had some people want it cooler than 72. Let's see. We're also making a big move and taken some significant steps to electrify, like Eric was saying, making sure that we can decarbonize our buildings with a clean grid, like assuming that electricity will just become cleaner. using less propane here has been important. So we purchased an electric gator when we needed to replace that piece of equipment, and are going towards heat pumps and are replacing our furnaces when we need to replace things. So yeah, that's kind of the energy steps that we've been taking among a whole slew of other sustainability related actions. And that would be one thing I would say is, not everyone's going to get super excited about the energy piece of sustainability and climate change. And so just to say that there's so many different things. There's going to be things that can get everyone excited. And so it might be nice when you're making your plans to think about what other things are people in your community going to want to do? Are they going to want to think about food? Are they going to want to think about habitat? Are they going to want to think about education? And so, yeah, incorporating those things into this whole package of ideas to work on. I could
Thank you,
say more about other things, but I think I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you to each of you. It's really inspiring to hear, especially with Nelson and Amy, with your organizational level fundraising, how you exceeded expectations, and it was a real morale booster, it sounds like, for your congregation and for camp. So we have 2 more questions that I'd love to hear your responses. Each of you have already touched on somewhat the financial aspect of how do we afford energy efficiency improvements. Just want to give you a chance if there's something more that hasn't been said that you would like to say about how do we, as either individuals, households, or organizations, how do we begin to think about how do we afford the cost of these improvements?
I think I'll jump in here with just a story from the house that my wife and I live in. We were coming off of oil and electricity for heat and everything else. And a few years ago, took a look at all of those costs averaged out across every month to really appreciate the large cost that was. And made that our loan financing amount, because we weren't in a place to pay for all of the work out of our reserves, but we're able to do insulation, air sealing, triple pane windows, mini split heat pumps, domestic hot water heat pump, and also solar. Where the financed cost of that work every month was the same cost as we were paying for energy before. And the end result is that, back to that net zero idea from the beginning, that we produce as much energy in a year as we use, and our house is all electric. And it is the same cost as it was before. Since that time, interest rates have gone up, but also other tools like the Inflation Reduction Act make many of these things more affordable to do. So it's just an introduction of an idea of like, recognize the costs that you're already spending for the status quo, for the systems as they are, and what kinds of tools, even just through loans, would possibly make that work, especially for a home or business, makes sense. I think what Nelson and Amy are sharing about the opportunity to raise capital for an organization like a church reflects other stories that I've heard here. Also, there's a church here in Lancaster that did where they were fundraising for individual panels, like they had kind of broken the cost up and divided it across by panel, so you could like feel that direct connection to it. So I think there's a lot of creative ways to engage in that capital raising campaign. But it's I think as environmental people, we've been hoping for financial incentives for a long time, and they're here. And the moment to do stuff really is more primed than it's ever been. So it's a really important time to try to figure out how to do this work.
Yeah, for congregations, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, usually you can get 30% from that as a direct pay from the government, and then you have to raise 70%. Well, our church looked at it as if we could even raise just a third of it, and then the rest of it could be paid for by the savings as we went along month by month. And that meant a payoff only 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. But then we ended up raising the whole thing, and so immediately the first year here, we're saving on our budget of the church because of those contributions. But I think efficiency is important. On my own home, I was on heating panels for 30 years, but now I've been for 12 years on photoelectrics. I switched over gradually to photoelectrics. And with electric panels, the tax incentives helped with financing of that, but also, let's see, what was I going to say? Anyhow, we've been able to expand our system a little bit. And the way the electric company set it up here is we could keep track of our energy use for a whole year. They don't do that anymore. They do it month by month now. But for the whole year, we ended up giving electricity, clean energy back to the electric company several $100s a year because we had more than 100%. And so the next thing we thought about, well, why rather than giving that back, let's buy a plug-in hybrid car and charge that off the roof too. So now I had a couple more panels yet. And so now after 12 years, we're over 100% energy total for our total use, including the car and the house together, and we're all electric on both of them. So I guess I've become a real believer in putting a little money into it up front and getting a minimum bill every month for the electric company. I don't know if that added anything to what you said, Eric, but what you said makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Nelson. Amy, anything you want to add from your experience at Friedenswald around affordability financing?
No, I think that's fine. I did remember there's a database called DSIRE that has every state's incentives in detail listed. So I just, if we could put that in the chat, that might be a good website to share.
Great, thank you. And also, Interfaith Power and Light is a great organization for accessing information for congregations and nonprofits around Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah. Well, we want to wrap up this part of our call with what has brought your community joy on this journey to energy efficiency, toward net zero. How has this journey strengthened your congregation, your organization, your community? Amy, would you want to start us off?
Sure. I saw a comment in the chat about Michigan's utilities not being that great about solar, and I would just echo that is true. There are some limits on what CAM can do with solar due to some policies that are in place, but still have managed to do some. Yeah, no, I would just say that CAMP's journey has been joy-filled, and the steps that we take, while sometimes feeling complicated, feel like really good questions to wrestle with, and the right questions, and it feels like we're living into our mission with more integrity, with kind of every step of progress we can make towards trying to be as sustainable as possible. And I think that has been felt in our constituent community as well. Giving in general here has just gone up, especially since COVID, but it's stayed higher than it had been in the past. We're attracting many more summer staff than we have had in the past. This is our second summer with 30 summer staff working, and in the past, when I began, it was like if we got 25, we were super excited. And I think that our living into our values there is one thing, you know, that helps. There was something else I was going to add, but anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Amy. Eric, would you like to jump in? How has this journey of toward energy efficiency brought joy and strength to your community?
Yeah, I've noticed so many people feel agency that they can do something. And I think the challenge of climate change is that often, you know, the gap between the seriousness of the problem that we recognize that climate change is, the gap between that and what we feel like we can do about it often seems so vast. And so diving in and doing what we can, I think really project by project really helps us to feel that and practice the work of doing this and then doing it again and exploring what comes next. And I think that's an empowering and joy-giving exercise.
Thank you. Nelson, what are your reflections on the joy and strength that this journey has brought to your congregation?
Well, I think this really gave us something new and a bit of excitement that we were trying to do something new here that hadn't been done before at our church. And there was some excitement about it and some, you know, consternation at a couple points, but and it was kind of difficult to try to move forward when we didn't really have the resources. And we struggled a year ago at the annual meeting, trying to balance the budget, trying to see if we could afford to move ahead with these projects and solve several problems. But the joy came this year when we had an annual meeting and all the utility budget had been cut, the mortgage had been out, saved enough that we were able to put money into outreach and reach out to others with that. And so that joy, and for me personally, it gives me joy that we are beginning to deal at least our part, do what we can as our part of reducing our damage to the environment. And I don't know if that is so universally held, but I know there are a lot of people in our church that would support that. But maybe some don't care as much about that as they do the economics. I find quite a diversity within our congregation in that regard. But yeah, I think the joy is that it's working and it's doing what we hoped it would. And we've kind of healed up some issues with our church and the budgets and so forth.
Well, thank you. Each of your stories have been so inspiring. I really thank you. I do want to turn it over to Lorraine. Our hour has sped by. We've had so much good stuff to hear and learn from our panelists. Lorraine, did you want to lift up any questions before we close here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a number of the questions that have been asked have been answered throughout the presentation, so I really appreciate that. But there might be just a couple of things to highlight that came in. One was one question about how we think about the return on investment when considering major changes like adding solar panels or buying an electric vehicle. And Eric, I think you might have something that you want to say to respond to that question.
Sure. Yeah, return on investment is a really important metric, and I think it's we need to consider it. My first reaction to it, though, is to think of like all the other things that we buy or do that don't have a return on investment at all. Like you buy a new car and it starts devastatingly decreasing in cost from day one. So this really is an incredible opportunity to do things that pay back and generate more value over their lifetime than they cost. And so, yeah, you have to work out the finances of how to do that. But I often try to think more about like a cash flow mindset of like, how does the cost of this thing compare on a month-by-month basis to what I was paying before, and perhaps are those savings from day one justifying doing this work, and emphasizing maybe that way of thinking about it versus the whole lifetime investment of the work.
Thank you. I think another question that came up was just ideas for setting up a real-time energy production display from solar panels in buildings. And I think maybe Nelson and Amy, you both had some experience with that maybe you could just respond to.
Maybe Amy, you want to start? I'll add a few comments, but.
I can just say we did that. We have SolarEdge inverters, and there's a website that shows the real-time production, and we used a Raspberry Pi to load that onto a TV monitor that we put in the dining hall. And we also added a Google slideshow, so the screen changes and it gives some information about sustainability things at camp, and then it goes to that screen with the production. So
that dovetails with what I was going to talk about too, because we put SolarEdge inverters in our solar system here too, and they have what they call a kiosk view. In other words, they have a website that they put out that you can just link a smart TV to, that cycles through how much energy you're getting every day or every month, and also cycles through the yearly amounts as well. You can see it all on the PET scan, the plan. Also, it puts the weather up too, if anybody's interested in the weather, the temperature, and when it's raining or not. It's kind of fun to watch. If you're a homeowner, there's and it depends on what kind of inverters you use, but we've used Enphase here. They have a program that shows you how much energy you get each day, but also there's another one called EYEDRO, EYEDRO, and you just put sensors on your lines coming in and sensors on your solar system, little current transformers, and you can get a net meter repeat report, and every day you see exactly how much energy you've generated with the sun, and every day how much you used in your home. And so you can look at how you're, and my wife gets upset if I say, well, you turned on the dryer or something like that. No, it's okay. But anyhow, it's fun to watch. And that one's a good one. And they make a commercial version too of that EYEDRO one, where you can put the sensors on your commercial system, 3-phase electricity for a large organization, and it'll show you exactly the same reports. Shows you how much you're getting, how much you're using. And we have special software on our system too, with sensors that can give us every day the report of how much the church used, how much the solar put out, and how much of it came from our energy came from the grid, and how much energy came from solar, and how much we gave to the electric company. So that's kind of fun to watch. But what you really need to do is figure out how to make use of that data and information to try to make it reduce the energy use some more. Those are a few things that we've done.
Thank you. Thank you all. I know there were a few other questions. I know that someone was curious about, what are the first steps in rallying support? Besides needing one of you in each of maybe their areas, because you are all such champions. But I think that is, one of the responses is finding that champion, and whether it's all of you on this call or someone else to partner with, to bring that sense of energy and urgency, I think, to our communities, to our congregation. So I think that might be, while it's each of you, you've also partnered with others who have also brought that sense that you've been able to do what you've done within your communities or within your homes or organizations. So thank you for that. And I know there might be other questions. I think we could probably go on for another hour with just those. But obviously, if there are questions that people have that haven't been answered, they should feel free to reach out. whether it's to any of you or to Carla to get information and to maybe respond to some questions if there are some additional ones. But thank you all for what you've contributed and for your responses. So appreciate it. And I'll turn it back over to you, Carla.
Thanks, Lorraine. And yes, again, just a huge thank you to Nelson and Eric and Amy. I know we've just touched on the tip of all of the wonderful knowledge and experience that you have to share. But we are so grateful for what you have shared today and for the practical and inspiring steps that you have shared. And I would be glad to receive questions from our participants. You can email me at carlasd@mennoniteusa.org. And I would be glad if I don't know all the answers, but I can point you to some great people who can help you on your journeys toward energy efficiency and net zero. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thanks to all of you who have joined us here today. We appreciate your attentiveness and your good questions. And we hope that you will keep asking those questions, keep having conversations in your households, your congregations, and your communities. My prayer is that this information helps you to take the next steps, helps you to have those conversations so that you can take practical steps toward climate justice in your setting. Want to let you know that there will be a recording of this webinar available on our Climate Justice Seeking Shalom webpage, part of the MCUSA website, and also on MCUSA's YouTube channel. And you can also access the other webinars that have been part of this Learn, Pray, Join initiative on those sites. We also invite you, if you don't already, to subscribe to Peacemail, which is Mennonite Church USA's weekly e-newsletter. You get the latest news from our denomination and events, and also updates on climate justice resources through Peacemail. We appreciate the support of Everence, who is a sponsor of our climate justice ministry, and we appreciate the support of you who are participants today. If you have appreciated this webinar, consider offering a donation to MCUSA's climate justice ministry. We thank you so much for your support. Again, thank you, everyone. Blessings on your journeys with energy efficiency, with climate justice, and seeking shalom for our world. Goodbye.